Hi, I'm Sean,
I'm Rhonda.
and we're excited to be with you today. We want to talk with you about what the man's role in the marriage is and some issues that we've seen, some problem areas that we've seen that are maybe from a misunderstanding about what that role should look like.
So, first, we want to talk about what is godly headship. Then, we want to move into what we're seeing that is getting a little bit turned, adjusted off of what is godly headship, and maybe a worldly perspective mixed in, and it's hurting marriages.
Yeah.
And we want to talk about what that looks like and what you can do to recover.
I think this will be an exciting topic to discuss, and I think it'll be very enlightening also. So let's get started. So let's look at this is all from the biblical standpoint. So we're going to be looking at some variety of different Bible verses, and because if we do marriage God's way, He's the one that came up with marriage, and if we do it His way and have His way of thinking, then we're going to have His kind of results.
So get out your Bibles and let's look at what does God say in His Word about godly headship. They say that to help people catch a counterfeit dollar bill, you have to first study not what's fake, but what's real.
Yeah.
So we want to look at what does God say and see what the Lord shows you in this. And then we want to talk about how does that kind of get off a little bit.
So let's first look at the word husband. So in the Bible, it uses the term husbandman as like a gardener, a person that's taking care of maybe fruit-bearing plants or trees. So if you look at the concept of a husband being like a husbandman who is taking care of his garden, a husband wants to take care of his wife in the same way.
A wife has her own unique needs. And so for a man to be a husband to his wife, he's taking care of those unique needs. And when we think of the Christ-church relationship, we see Christ taking care of the church, and the church sometimes being the more definitely in that relationship, being the more needy person. And we see a lot of times, don't we, that the woman is the one who sees the things we could do to adjust and grow in the relationship. And so for a man to zero in on what does my wife need because she is female, and what does my wife need just because she is a unique female.
Yeah. So, for example, let's say you are a husbandman taking care of some tomato plants. And so if you walk out and the leaves are wilting, do you fuss at your plant? Or if the leaves are yellow, do you rebuke the plant? You ought not to, be that way. You need to have bright green leaves and be bearing luscious fruit. For example, you'd say, hey, I need to water it more. I need to give it this nutrient. It's in need of something that I need to give it. And so you're the one, the man is the one, as the husbandman, as the caretaker, as the gardener, who's responsible for feeding and nourishing the wife with what she has need of. So if you see your wife is maybe lacking or needing in a certain area, you're the one who has the responsibility to give to her that nutrient that she needs to flourish.
And I think of that in Ephesians 5, where it talks about that the man is supposed to nourish and cherish his wife.
Yeah.
Isn't that what a husbandman is doing?
It is exactly what he's doing. So let's look at that in Ephesians chapter 5, where it says that Jesus, the way he takes care of the church is he nourishes, cherishes the church.
And so when we think about the husbandman, isn't that exactly what we're talking about? And every woman wants to be nourished and cherished. And so, when we think about a man, his wife is endeared to him. She is a special and precious thing to him. And he's looking after, taking care of her. When we think of nurture, a lot of times we think of what a mama does with her little ones. Not that he's treating her like a child by any stretch. But we do think of taking care of those needs.
The better we take care of our garden, right? The more fruit that we're going to get from it. It works the same way in our marriage relationship. The more we are nurturing, to our wife, the more that we're going to receive back as we pour into and take care of those needs. If we look at in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 15, he says that Jesus was touched with the feeling of our infirmities, that he might be a faithful and a merciful high priest. So you see there that Jesus is in touch with what we're feeling so that he can better take care of us. That's the power, right, of what God did, is that he sent Jesus to become a man so that he could deliver us and save us. And so this is the relationship between a husband and wife is the same as that between Christ and the church. So what you see Christ doing for the church is what the husband is to model toward his wife.
Yeah, and when I, as a woman, think about my husband doing this for me, or as the church, that Christ did this for me, coming to walk in my shoes, to understand my infirmities, to be touched with my feelings. And infirmities there has to do with weaknesses, the struggles we women deal with, and we feel like our emotions are like the little roller coaster ride. And I think some men can inadvertently shame their wives for being female. And yet this is part of who we are, as part of our makeup, the emotion and everything. And we instead want our spouse to be able to connect with that and be able to love us through that. But be in touch with what I feel.
Yeah.
Understanding what I'm dealing with, instead of always having to have that fix-it mentality. Well, let me fix you. It's like, what about just understand me and be able to relate so that I feel a connection here based on who I am and what I'm dealing with.
If you look at Isaiah chapter 53, he says, Jesus bore our pains and he carried our sorrows, and with his stripes we are healed. So if you look at that in the marriage relationship taking place, a husband is bearing her infirmities, he's bearing her pains and her sorrows, and he's carrying that in his body, and then that is bringing healing to her. Also in Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 17, it says that in all things it behooved him, Christ, to be made like to his brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest. So you've got the same wording, the wording there, that of him being a merciful and faithful high priest by being made like us. And so, I think of it that if a husband is hurt with what hurts her, a lot of times we don't want to go there, right? If something's hurting our spouse, that's uncomfortable to us, and we don't want to go there. Nobody wants to feel hurt, right? We all kind of move away from that. But if the more that we enter into that and share that, kind of like in Galatians, it says to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. So in the marriage, if I am bearing her burden, if I'm carrying that with her, then I am really carrying that and removing that from her.
I like that it says merciful and faithful. I think a lot of women are looking for that in their husbands, for him to have mercy on them, and not try to masculinize the female, but to be able to embrace, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually, that which is feminine, which is very different from that which is masculine. And then that faithfulness, it builds trust. For a woman, when a man is faithfully loving her, caring, and keeping that connection going, regardless of what she's dealing with, that he so knows her, that he's journeying alongside with her in that.
Yeah, it's not really, him so much, I want to change you, right? But I want to carry that for you. Yeah. And take a burden off, seeing that if our spouse is struggling, they're carrying a burden, and we need to come alongside. That's the joy of marriage. That's why we got married, right? It's to carry those burdens together. And
it might be easy for a man to say, well, I have burdens too. Well, remember in this video, we're talking to the husband. I'm sure it could seem awfully slanted. Well, you're telling me all the stuff I need to do. It's like, well, that's the purpose of this, is more to the men. And I'll just kind of echo in some of the female thoughts maybe here as we weave through this, but that's the idea, is what does the word say to the men? So we're not saying the women have no responsibility, but that'd be for a different video.
Yeah. So there's a great verse in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7, where it says, likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge. There's a science there, an understanding. And he talks about as being heirs together of the grace of life. You know, we're talking about there about that our spouse is together with us. We're joint heirs together, and it's not, doesn't give the picture of the, you know, the man's here and the, you know, the woman is underneath him in the sense of a lower scale or something.
But he's valuing her.
Yeah.
He's placed a value not on what she can do to serve him, but on her contribution to the partnership of marriage. And we believe that this joint heirs shows more of a partnership than a subservient, she's basically an adult child in the household, that he's he's daddy to her.
Yeah.
And instead, they are partners, and they both bring to the table something godly. Because in the beginning, God created the man and the woman. Before he said he needs help and took that part out, they were both God. Mm-hmm. It wasn't masculine and feminine.
In the image of God.
Yeah, and so, you know, what we don't want to do is elevate the masculine qualities of who God is and act like the feminine qualities of who God is, which Holy Spirit tends to embody. We don't want to minimize that as if that's less important.
So basically,
it's all God.
So we don't need to be looking at between the male and female that one is superior and the other is inferior. Both are made in the image and likeness of God. Deuteronomy chapter 24 and verse 5, it talks about the concept that when a man and a wife are in their first year of marriage, that he's not to be charged with any business, go out to war, but he says stay at home and cheer up his wife. So think about this as the concept of planting a tree, and a lot of times you see these guide wires that are put around trees when they're first planted to make sure that as it is getting its root system established, that it's growing up in the direction that you want it to go. And so in the marriage, it's so important that what we're doing early on in the marriage is something that we want to last. And that idea that he is to cheer up his wife, he's to make sure that she is happy.
You know, I like that. Of course, I like these things because I'm the wife, and we're talking about the things that she receives of him. And really, we'll say, just, you know, the whole premise of all of this is a man shouldn't ask or demand his wife to submit if he's not first taking responsibility to do his part of what the Bible says.
Something that she can submit to.
Yeah,
really.
Yes.
Worthy to be submitted to.
And so the whole idea of this is, of course, the women are going to like it. Why? Because God laid it out this way, and it's the way to make a man approachable for a woman to want to submit to. So a man shouldn't demand that a woman submit. You should be submitting to me. Well, the first thought would be, are you being obedient to the Word of God to be the kind of man God is asking her to submit to?
Yeah.
You know, but when we think about what they would do this first year, you know, we think about all the habits that would be set up during that first year as he is focusing, withdrawing from business and war and political things. Why? To focus on making her happy. What can I do to make this woman happy? Can you imagine that? Yeah. Can you imagine God saying that? This needs to be your priority as a married man for the whole first year.
Over the economy and over national defense.
Yeah, take a look at that.
Yeah, that's exciting. All right, so of course in Genesis, and Jesus repeated this in Matthew, he talks about a man leaving his father and mother and cleaving to his wife. So that word cleave to is to pursue or to stick to like glue. And so, you know, that is something that many times in the beginning of a relationship before marriage, you see the man pursuing the woman, going after her, but that's not to ever stop.
Right. And you know, if you look at your wife, husbands, as a helper that God gifted to you, then you would be pursuing that help, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah. In Genesis chapter 2 and verse 18, this is where God comes to the man and says, basically, you need help. You know, it's not good for man to be alone. I'm going to make a helper suitable for him. And this is where he brings Eve to Adam. And so for a man to realize, excuse me, that he needs help, I need this woman in my life, and God's going to speak to me. God's going to move in my life. God's going to bring help to me through this woman. And so that I'm trusting that God is working and speaking through her.
Can you see the idea in verse 24, which is just a few verses after he says he needs help? The idea of cleave, pursue, stick to like glue. And so, you know, first he said, you need a helper. And then he's like, and this is how I want you to interact with this helper. I want you to pursue her. I want you to stick to her like glue. Does that sound like a woman that's a doormat to you? Not at all. It sounds like a woman who, because of how God created her, he's got to have her. And it really gives a different light to even 1 Peter 3:7 about the highly valuing, the honoring her, because she is a weaker vessel. And if you study that out, it to me, what I was looking at when I saw it, it's got to do, vessel is an instrument, a tool that God would use. And because she is the helper, the tool God would use for him, she should be honored. God blessed him with her. And if God gives you a gift, that gift should be highly valued and cherished.
Hey, a lot of times you see men take care of their tools, right? And men are very tool-oriented, very fix-it-oriented. And, you know, if you look at that concept of your wife through that lens, I think that might help you to make a good comparison there. So while we're in Genesis, let's look at in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 27. He says that God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he them, male and female created he them. And God blessed them, said to them, be fruitful, multiply, replenish, subdue the earth, have dominion over every living thing that moves on the earth. So what are we seeing here? This is the very beginning when God made male and female, and they are both equally, man and woman, masculine and feminine, are representing the image of God.
And, you know, when we look at Ephesians 5, when it talks about submitting one to another, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? When you say she's also meant to have dominion and authority in the earth. She is not a powerless individual.
Right.
And so, you know, there is kind of that going back and forth there. Not one person lording it over another like a dictator or that parental role, but more of that partnership idea.
Yeah. So when he made man in the beginning, you have this embodied in one body, male and female, and then we see in Genesis 2 where he removed the rib from Adam, and out of that made the woman. And so all of these things of God are where he said the two shall be one. He made them one, then made them two, and then he said, and the two shall be one. Yeah. And so by masculine connecting with feminine and vice versa, we find that perfection that God intended us to enjoy.
You know, when we look at the Christ-church relationship, I think of the church with Holy Spirit inside. We see a flow there, don't we? We see the expression of Holy Spirit through a person, through the church. And then we see the flow of Holy Spirit, though, where we want to flow in Holy Spirit. And I think when we look at the Christ-church relationship, we see him in her and her in him. Kind of like Jesus said, I'm in my Father and my Father's in me. You're in me and I'm in you. Yeah. You know, I'm the vine, you're the branches. That connectivity and that flow is not really one dominating the other. You know, and when you look at the way Jesus does with the church, he's not micromanaging. We don't become puppets, do we? Yeah. He still gives us dominion and the right to decide and the right to act in his place and in his stead in this earth.
Yeah, and he made us both as kings and priests. You know, he said that we are in Revelation chapter 1, he says that we are kings and priests to God and his Father. So that's both male and female. And of course, in Galatians, he says that in Christ there's neither male nor female, for you are all one. And so he's showing the oneness of our relationship together and how God sees us and how we ought to see our spouse, that we're jointly sharing in power.
You know, and you look at Jesus and the disciples and you see that, you know, the man may have a lot of things that his will might be for his wife to move into this or that would be his desires that maybe she hasn't quite lined up with yet. But we look at Jesus saying to the disciples, I have a lot of things to say to you, but you can't handle them yet. That's in John 16:12.
Yeah.
Jesus withheld it because he was not going to cram it down their throats. He allowed the church to grow as they were capable, as they were able.
And this is a really powerful thing to live out in our marriage. You know, if in the marriage either the man or the woman saw that the other one was a little bit weaker in an area or something, you don't see that concept of God forcing or pushing something, even
Right.
as a parent with a child, when they're learning to eat different foods and even to eat meat, for example. You know, you don't give them different types of food or even meat in the beginning. They start off with milk and progress, and we don't want to choke our spouse and lose them over trying to force something on them.
You know, and that's allowing our spouse to be where they are and to grow into something in the relationship instead of insisting and forcing.
Yeah.
You know, it's in it demonic power and influence that tends to take over, control, force, dictate. But Holy Spirit guides, directs, encourages, and strengthens us as we grow. These things should be a choice. They should not be taken. Things in a marriage relationship should be given and offered, not taken.
Yeah, because, you know, we are to respect and to recognize the individuality and the choice and will of each other. You don't see God overriding our will. You know, he said, whoever will, let him come. It's not, you know, I know best and I'm going to shove it down your throat, you know, whether you want it or not. No, we have to choose. We have to decide. And it's the same way in the marriage. We don't need to be forcing and pushing our spouse. We need to allow them to make their own decisions and choose. In Acts chapter 15 and verse 10, when the Gentiles first turned to God, initially the Jewish believers were saying, hey, don't they need to be keeping all the law of Moses? You know, and after they kind of studied on it for a while, they said, hey, why tempt you God to put a yoke on them that we haven't been able to bear ourselves? And that was in the concept of maybe all of the particular laws of Moses. And then he's saying that, you know, just these three necessary things he presented to them. Just have them keep these things. And so basically the idea is there, we don't need to be putting a yoke on our spouse, a heaviness, a burden to them that they cannot handle or bear.
And you look under the old covenant, and the people couldn't measure up, right? So that's why God sent Jesus, to make up that deficit and basically say, I accept you just as you are. He died for us while we were yet sinners. And so if you could see that if your wife is doing something against you, you know, if you could allow her to grow between her and the Lord into, you know, doing the things that you might want to see in the marriage, you know, and realizing that God isn't heavy-handed. Yeah. He is not burdening people down, putting a yoke on them they cannot handle, and that they can never measure up, but he accepts us like we are.
Just, I mean, what I'm thinking about again is gardening, and so you know, hard ground, putting a heaviness on your plant, and then you expect it to flourish. What do? You get out there, you break up the ground, you make the ground soft, so it can receive the rain, and so it can grow, and the roots can spread out easily in the ground. Hard, compacted ground is not a good growing environment for a plant. And so having that concept in the marriage, I want to make things open. I want open as
air where you breathe.
Right, breathable,
Yeah.
right, so that my spouse can breathe, not a heaviness,
which suffocates and
Yeah.
strangles the life out of a marriage.
yeah. So,
Also, we see the idea here of ask what you will, and it'll be done for you. Jesus came to serve. Look at how he spent his time on earth. He didn't do things to care for himself,
yeah,
but continuously made himself available to care for them. What would you have me do?
oh goodness, and that is so powerful because you see the idea where Jesus. What was it? James and John, wanted to sit by his side, and the whole idea came up of how he said the Gentiles rule over.
Yeah.
They exercise dominion, but he said it's not going to be that way among you. He said the least of you will be the greatest, and that the one that is servant to all is going to be the greatest one. And so Jesus said, that's the way I came. He said, I came to give my life as a ransom for many and to serve. I mean, we see that in John chapter 13, where he took the towel, girded himself, and he washed the disciples' feet.
Yeah.
And he came to serve us. He says things, you read in the New Testament where he would ask, what would you have me do for you? What is it you want? That's a servant, a person that's come to serve, and that is a man, as a leader, right, in the house. That's what he's telling us to do, is to serve like Christ, and that's the greatest one.
And even when it talks about elders, it says, to serve by example, not by being Lord over the people.
Not being lords over God's heritage.
But the thing
rulers.
is, I think when people mix in carnality with what is godly headship, they start playing dictator. And taking over a worldly mentality, when in fact being a leader is actually taking on that servanthood.
In Ephesians 5, it talks about the husband as head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. And I think we've kind of explored that enough to see that, the head is not one that is in a dominating, I'm knocking you down, the lower I put you, the higher I go kind of thing. That's not the way, that he does things. He raises us up to sit with him in heavenly places. And so in 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 14, he says, I will therefore that the younger women marry, bear children, guide the house, and give none occasion to the adversary to speak reproachfully. So if you look at the word guide there, it is to be the head of and rule a family. And so, many times you hear men using the concept of God made me to be the head of the house and the priest of the household. We just want to make sure that we have the right idea of what a head is and what a head is doing. We already saw that in I think it was Mark chapter 10, where he talked about the head is actually the lowest, the one that's serving the others. And here, actually, he's saying that the woman is the head of the house and that she is guiding the family.
And that word there about guiding means to be head or rule a family. So it's not a godly thing for a man to strip a woman of her power and authority. Look at what Jesus did for the church.
Oh, goodness.
He came to give the church power and authority. And the church struggles to the extent they don't know who they are. That they do not walk in the Spirit of Christ and represent Christ with the empowerment that he gives for us to accomplish the things we're supposed to accomplish.
It is so powerful when you see there in Matthew 28, when Jesus was resurrected and he said, all power is given unto me in heaven and earth, go ye. What do you see there? He's sharing power with us. He's not saying, no, it's all mine. He's saying, hey, all power is given to me. Now you go, you take that power and that authority, and you do things.
And I think of Proverbs 31 as we talk about all of this, where The woman is, you look at the Proverbs 31 woman.
Oh, wow.
She is no doormat.
No.
She is out there seeing land and buying it. So she's not one of these women that doesn't have access to the money. She's a stay-at-home mom and she doesn't have any money. No, she's got the money.
Yeah.
She has access and she knows what to do with it.
She's profitable. She is bringing the household up. She's clothing the household, it said, with scarlet. She has the ability. This woman is making decisions. She has power. And her husband, it said, sits in the gate. So he's in a position of authority, but you don't see him micromanaging the woman, telling her every move to make.
Right. Instead, he empowers her to be able. When you have two people acting as one who are fulfilling different but complementary roles, you see a family or a business going farther. But think of a business with a couple of employees and they're all, micromanaged. Nobody can make a move unless it goes through the president. That's a stifled business and not very likely to flourish, not very likely to make it, really, because you can really only go as far as one person can. But if you can go as far as multiple very skilled people can go, you're going to prosper more. But the fact is, if we stifle somebody, they can't really flourish. They can't really prosper. If they can never fall on their face and make a mistake and learn from it, because I'm not going to let you mess with my money, then we don't allow someone to grow and learn.
Right. Man, that is so good. So let's look at 1 Corinthians 7. He says there that the husband and wife ought to render or give due benevolence, due kindness. Something is owed to your spouse, and I owe something to Rhonda, she owes something to me, and that we are to be giving that thing that is owed to them, and that we are to meet their need and not neglect them.
And it says that, the husband doesn't have power over his own body, but the wife does. The wife doesn't have power over her own body, but the husband does. And a lot of men could say, well, what do I do if? Well, the idea here is not what is my wife doing wrong, remember. But we're looking more at the husband's role. So if you look at it and you say to the husband, the wife has power, authority over your body.
Yeah.
And not you.
And this is equal both ways.
Yeah, but you gave yourself to her.
Yeah.
You picked the woman you would give yourself to.
So the man isn't saying, I make all the decisions. No, he is to share that power, and she has power over him. He has power over her.
So is she saying some things she would like for you to do? Well, if she has authority, where does that put you? What are you in rebellion between you and her? And like I said, we're not talking, yes, she has responsibilities too. And we're not talking that she leads you around by the nose as if you have no sense of your own. We're talking two joint heirs here who are sharing power and know how to work together in the marriage. So there's a lot more to be said about blending he and she. This is not the end of it. Hopefully this is the beginning of it, to help men understand what does the word say and what should my perspective be. And it's not so much of so where do I go from here to correct my woman? It's more this way between you and the Lord. Let the Lord deal with her. You can say some things, but it's not up to you to be Holy Spirit to her.
And this is not a once and done thing. You're going to spend your whole married life learning how to do it better. And it's the same way in our relationship with God. It's not a once and done, I gave my life to the Lord and now I'm just going to coast from here on out and I'm never going to have to grow, never going to have to change anything. That's not the right concept to have.
Yeah.
So we're going to be corrected in our relationship with God. We're going to be growing. Hopefully you're better today than you were yesterday in your walk with God.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're better, this month or this year than you were last month or last year. Same way in your relationship with your spouse. So let's go and look at Malachi chapter 2, verses 13 through 16. And here, this is kind of a sad commentary. Basically, it's showing the wife is weeping and crying on the altar, and that God is not receiving the man's offering anymore because God has been a witness, because the man has dealt treacherously against his wife, calls her the wife of his youth, and he says because she is his companion and the one that he has made a covenant with, and God made them one.
He says, pay attention to your spirit that you don't deal treacherously, because God hates putting away. So you want to be watching your spirit. Are you hardening to her? Are you shutting her out? Are you separating yourself or certain things from her so she doesn't have access to you or access to money or parenting or whatever part of life?
You know, look at when he says that God is saying, hey, you're treating your wife treacherously. What is treachery? What is being treacherous? And so looking at that, it's to cover with a garment, to act covertly, to pillage, and treating unfaithfully. And so, you know, we don't want to treat our spouse in a covert or an unfaithful way. We want to be treating them respectfully and honoring them in the relationship.
And notice here, she's weeping and crying on the altar. She's calling out to God for help. And the man doesn't get it. And this is where we start looking at what are some problems that we are seeing them. I'm sure there's a lot more than what we see. So we're just going to share with you what we see.
Yeah.
But we see the women crying for help on the altar. God doesn't take that lightly when a woman begins to weep and cry because of the wounding happening to her spirit, because of what's happening in the marriage.
You know, this is a sad state here, and you know, it says that God is a witness on this. You know, you look going back to 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7. You know, the end of that verse is that he says all these things, that a man ought to dwell with her according to knowledge, with his wife according to knowledge, that his prayers not be hindered. And so, man, we don't want a God bearing witness against us because we aren't treating our wife right, because she's weeping and crying. Oh my goodness, that is not the kind of relationship you want to be in. We need to be sensitive and paying attention to, am I cheering up my wife? Are you happy?
Yeah.
Am I serving you? How can I minister to you better? How can I meet your needs better? Man, you are empowered by God. God has empowered you to meet every need that she has, that he intended for you to meet. So if there's anything in his word that he says for you to meet that's her need, you have the capability and the power to meet that need. He wouldn't be asking or telling you to do something he did not also equip and empower you to do.
And you look at it yourself as a parent. Maybe you have children. Maybe you have special needs children. Do you look at them and say, well, you're just too needy. I'm only going to give you the basics of what I think you need, and that's all. Or do we meet the needs of our children, and we're there for them through thick and thin because they're our children? And are you that way towards your wife, to minister to her delicate self? Because women are delicate, because they are female. They are not male. They don't, their brain isn't wired like the male who can compartmentalize and just get over it. Well, you shouldn't feel that way. She is female. She is not male. She is not going to think like you think or box off and compartmentalize like you do. And so she needs your strength, you know, and that doesn't mean that you abandon her in her need and leave her to just figure it out on her own.
You know, with each male and female, there's strengths and corresponding weaknesses. And that's where God put us together to be one, where what I need, my wife is supplying. What she needs, I'm supplying. And the two of us is kind of like gears working together, right? And we're like a puzzle pieces are fitting together, and we are joining together to be better and greater than we were apart.
And you know, when it says she is your companion, that's a consort, in particular the spouse of a reigning monarch. When he talks about being treacherous, to pillage, to be unfaithful, you know, if you think of severing a reigning monarch, you know, taking their power away, stripping them of the power and authority they ought to have. When you think of pillaging and being unfaithful, taking things that don't belong to you, that are not given to you. So many people think that because we're married, I have a right to certain things. You have a right to be blessed by your spouse to the extent they are a blessing to you. You do not have a right to rape and pillage because you're married. You don't have a right to take that which is not given to you, as if your spouse is a possession, as if your spouse is like a piece of furniture and you decide what's going to happen with it. This goes both ways, and a lot of this goes both ways.
Yeah. A lot of times I think in the marriage relationship, when you see something that's out of sync, that isn't working, it's revealing something that is not working in a person's relationship with God. And so if we have this concept that God is that ruling monarch who is overriding, my will, and he is demanding and not sharing power and these type things, we're going to transfer that to our spouse, and that's the way we're going to treat them because we see that that's the way God's treating me. But when you see the concept of how Christ came and shares power with us and invites us to ask what we will, and that he is making us to sit with him as joint heirs with him in heavenly places, you see him lifting us up, not putting us down, but by, it's like that he would become greater by making us smaller. No, he is great by lifting us up, and that we should be doing that with our spouse, not putting down, not micromanaging, not controlling.
I mean, you look at, he is the King of kings, the high priest of priests, Lord of lords. He has made us kings, priests, lords under his authority. Well, the husband and the wife are that way, spiritually speaking. So one king shouldn't be squashing another king. And so helping her to flourish, helping her understand. But so the presentation of the woman in a marriage where the man he's maybe taking the idea of headship, I should be the head, but it's not godly. He isn't first checking himself, am I lining up with what the word says I ought to be doing? Because when a man does that, it's almost, it could be automatic because of the seeds you're sowing spiritually, for her to also line up. When you line up with the word, you open the door for your wife to also line up with the word and be submissive and to be a partner and joint heir. But when a man is disobedient to the word, it makes it difficult for his wife to be obedient to the word with him. He's not sowing obedient seeds. He is in rebellion, and he's reaping a rebellion, perhaps, a disconnect for sure in the marriage, and blaming the wife for his harvest. And so we would encourage you, sow the kind of seed you want to reap. If you want a woman obedient to the word, check yourself. Where are you on these things? When we look at the flip side, the carnality coming in and twisting, diluting, adulterating the word, we see not a husbandman taking care of his garden, but we see a harsh environment. Usually what we will encounter with a woman is a lot of intensity. She's falling apart. She does see that she's doing some things wrong. She's a lot of times escalating because of the harshness, the intensity in the household. He's not creating a safe environment, but he may not realize he's doing it. And this is part of the reason we want to share this information, because we think there's a lot of men that don't realize what they're doing. And they think that something's mentally going on with their wife, that look at the problems she has, look at the way she's reacting, she's not being respectful to me. And we get it. This is also going on in the distressed relationship. But when you look closer, if a relationship is not just distressed, but there's this dominating of the man over her going on, she begins to fall apart spiritually, mentally, emotionally. She cannot hold up under the pressure he's putting on her. And he's pointing a finger. Look at her. look at what she's doing.
Yeah,
Something's
you're,
wrong with
you're
her.
falling apart. Get yourself together instead of let me come along. Let me hold up your arms, like the concept of Aaron and Hur holding up Moses' arms. There he had assistance, and the victory Israel received because he had help holding his arms up. We want to come alongside our spouse, and if we see a weakness, we cover it, right? We lift up, we encourage, we strengthen. We have that husbandman mentality of let me give you what you need to grow and to flourish. Let me lead by example, not by squashing you, not by taking power away from you, not by me isolating you, but by me coming alongside you, holding you up and causing you to grow and flourish and you be everything that God wants you to be.
And so some of the things that we see what appears to be verbal and emotional abuse. Now, it's not our place to diagnose that, but the symptoms are kind of stark. That, when you see enough of it, and you see the consistencies in those particular couples, it's different from what you see in a marriage that's just distressed. They're struggling. They're thinking about divorce because they don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to resolve issues, but they don't have this in the picture. When you see this in the picture, when you see this domination, this control going on, we're going to ask you, men, please hang with us while we talk about this. And please pray over, when you look at the spectrum of maybe you're doing it a little, maybe you're doing it a lot, it's destructive to the marriage, and it will kill a woman relationally.
What if a man says, I didn't think my words were that harsh. I didn't think that it should have equaled the wilting effect that it had on her. She's just too sensitive, or she took that wrong. She didn't understand my heart. That's really justifying what you're doing, regardless of the impact that it has on your spouse. Rather, we need to change our delivery so that that they're having the impact that is intended. And so we may have to change our words because the way that is being received by our spouse.
And we see these women afraid of interactions with their husbands. Now, he may not be abusing them physically, but the emotional and mental and spiritual abuse is so extreme to her. It's almost like she has a PTSD sort of thing. She may be withdrawing and going quiet. She may try to stand up for herself because she's tired of being bullied in her own home. And yes, I said bullied in her own home. A man who believes this is what the head of the house looks like, but it's carnal. It's not that servanthood head of the house. It's more of I'm in control. I'm the head. What I say goes. She becomes invisible. It's not a he plus she equals we. It's a he. Take away the she. She needs to conform to he, and this is a he marriage. There is no she anymore in the picture. She knows she's invisible. She's being treated pretty much like he's a dictator, and he is controlling and ruling and reigning over her. She's certainly not a joint heir. Or he's like daddy, and she's like a child. And she has to go to daddy. Can I have money to spend? It's like, really? She maybe is a stay-at-home mom. Maybe she does or doesn't homeschool. Maybe she has a part-time job, but not enough to cover herself. And she has to ask for money. I mean, if you were a single parenting man, you'd have to pay child care. Yeah. And yet a lot of men won't give their wives even as much as what they'd have to pay if they had to hire somebody. The woman in these situations, not all the time, this is an extreme, is actually in poverty and penniless. She doesn't have a penny to her name unless he gives her some money. And it's like, oh, how nice of you to give her an allowance. How nice of you to occasionally, here's $10 or $20, go shopping. And yet the children have needs that he doesn't see, because in the male eyes, those are not needs. That's frivolous. And it's like, well, did you ever consider that the female perspective is to balance you out? It's not to take away, and certainly it doesn't give a woman license to be frivolous and drive the family to poverty or anything like that. However, you married her, This is the woman you chose.
And you're one with her.
And you don't really
Yeah.
get to sit on her now and say, yeah, I married you, but you know what? Not going to let you influence this or that in our lives.
It's kind of like a person sitting in their boat and poking holes in it, hoping that it's going to, take them to the other side. And, if a person is attacking their spouse, they're drilling holes in their own vessel. It's like you want to drive somewhere, so you go out and you slice your tires, right? So it just makes no sense. It makes no sense within the marriage that the one that God created you to do life together with, who's one with you, and to attack them and to put holes in your own vessel that you need to carry you.
If she's having to ask your permission for every move she makes, or for a lot of moves she makes, you're not allowing her to be a Proverbs 31 woman by any stretch, nor having authority in the household. If she has to come to you and ask, that's not having a woman be submissive. That's controlling a woman. Because a submissive woman, she knows your will and she operates within it, but it's not a micromanaging will where you're telling her every move to make. That's a puppet. That's not a wife. And we say a lot of times some men kind of have a concubine relationship with their wives.
Right. They're not treating them as a joint heir, as a co-heir in the relationship. They're treating them as lesser and putting them down. And you're never going to rise to what God has for you by putting your spouse down in any way, by choking them, by restricting them. You're restricting and choking down your own engine that is to carry you, the one that God brought to help you, that he said, you need help. Now here's this one, and you're going to be benefited by choking your help.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way. And so...
if I could say, so when women are having to ask permission, operating within the bounds of his will and asking permission for every move, that's more what a child does. When we talk about a concubine relationship, these women are expected to have sex with their husbands and take care of the children, cook, clean, do a servant sorts of things, but there's no relationship. She is just like a servant who gives him sex. And for a lot of women, they're not wanting to have sex. And a man may be like, but this is what you're supposed to do as a woman. Are you giving her emotional sex? When was the last time she had emotional sex? A lot of men, when we meet with the couples, they may have gone weeks, maybe months, without physical sex, but the woman a lot of times has gone months or years without emotional sex, which is the counterpart to physical sex.
Which makes a woman feel like a prostitute, and that, when she performs well, then he gives her some, kind of allowance or some kind of a payment. And that's not the kind of a flourishing relationship.
And God kind of put a price tag on marriage. He said, you know what? If you're going to sleep with a woman, if you're going to have sex with a woman, you've got to give yourself to her for the rest of your life. You've got to become hers and she becomes yours. That's the price tag. But you see a lot of people get married. And remember, we're only talking about the men's side of the relationship. We're not talking about the woman's side. And there's all that. We get it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when a lot of couples get married, he quits giving himself to her. He's not hers. But she's his, and she better act like his, and he controls, but he's not going to give her anything that she asks for. Because in his mind, and as a man, it doesn't make sense. Well, guess what? It's female, and it's something very different, and is the spouse that you chose to become one with. And so you have to figure out, how do I become one with this person who's very different from me? I may not agree with everything, but I sure do need to become one with who this person is.
Yeah.
And it's more about we both jointly bring things to the table rather than we make demands and she conforms to me. But it's more of a he conforms to her and she conforms to him. They become a new creature. that's a we. It's not he or she anymore. It's what is joint. What is the two of them together? So if in your finances, which is one way that we see a lot of men controlling their wives, is through the money.
Right.
Because really, she can't do anything if she doesn't have access to the money, if she can't also make decisions. And definitely you should have a budget that you both agree on. We're not talking about the extreme, the other side of the ditch here, right? But a lot of men control these in this type of situation we're talking about. One of the main things you'll see is she has no access to the money or little access, and daddy is in full control of the money. After all, he's the one who works outside the house, so shouldn't he have a say? And it's like, well, you have a wife. She's not a child nor a concubine, so she jointly has say. You just happen to be the one who's tending to things outside the household while she's taking care of everything within the household. Both equally necessary.
Yeah. You know, as today, as I was kind of thinking over the things that we would be sharing along this line, I thought of a phrase from the book of Nahum where God said to Israel, "Consider your ways." And when he said that, what was taking place was God's house, temple was lying waste, needed to have repairs done to it, yet God's people were living in very nice houses. And so he's saying, hey, consider your ways. You know, you're taking care of your own thing, but you're not taking care of my things. And he said, actually to them, he says, you know, you're bringing in money, but you're putting it into bags with holes in it. Basically, you're bringing it in, and you're losing it, you know, just as fast as you're bringing it in. And he's saying, consider your ways. Sometimes, you know, we need to stop and we need to think, you know, kind of like when I said that about, you know, being in a boat and you're drilling holes in it, you know, consider what we're doing. What is the net result of what my actions are? What is the impact of what I'm doing on my spouse? And if this is what I'm experiencing, something needs to change. And we can't change. I can't change my wife. I can only change me. God hasn't given me the power to change my spouse or any other person.
That's where you get into witchcraft.
That's right. I don't have the power to change anyone but me. And I have to take responsibility for me. And I can't say, but she's doing this and she's doing that. No, but what am I doing? Because I'm the only one that has power to change me. And so I take full responsibility, kind of like, you know, you're familiar with the phrase, the buck stops here, right? So I take responsibility, I'm responsible, and I'm not passing this off to somebody else. I take responsibility, kind of like, you know, you hear the phrase, man up, right? So we want to man up, and we want to take responsibility for my part, my contribution, what I'm doing.
But a lot of men, when we see this carnality creep in the name of godly headship, and it's not, we see that he's verbally and emotionally abusive. Now, he doesn't feel like he is. He does not get the fact that the male voice is deep anyway, and when you put some firmness or emotion, negative emotion to it, it feels harsh to the female ears. Probably one of the number one things we hear from women is he comes across as harsh. Now, bless his heart, he's innocent. Some of them are in it, and because among men, that's not harsh. That's the way they talk to each other. That's the way they banter.
It works two ways, you know. A woman sometimes can be intense in her presentation.
Come across as disrespectful.
Maybe be wordy or something. And so the man withdraws from that and says, change that. But she can say, oh, I'm just being myself, right? This is the way I communicate. I communicate this way.
That doesn't make it okay.
A little more emotional or something, you know, and you ought to live with it and be okay with it. No, this works both ways. So the man has some things to change in communication, and so does the woman.
And so when he's being verbally and emotionally abusive, a lot of times when we try to help couples in this category, it's part of the reason we want to do this video, it's difficult to help them because the men are so hardened and they're so convinced this is the way it ought to be. I'm the man of the house. I'm the head of the house. And they see that as like the world's way, like Jesus said, what is that, Mark 10, 42 through 43, the way the people of the world have lordship, they rule and reign over, and it's difficult for him to see anything different. And it's difficult to get change in a marriage like that. The woman is broken, and sometimes so broken she has no power left. She's in survival mode, and she's barely holding on to her sanity. And honestly, there will be some women that may need to separate just to get a hold of themselves and save themselves spiritually, because they can't handle the abuse anymore. And yes, it is abuse. It is emotional and verbal abuse. When a person says things like, "You would never make it without me anyway. You would never be able to take care of the children without me, or keep the children without me. You'll mess up," and threaten. Those are threats. Those are whittling away at who she is. You're never going to be good enough. And other things that whittle away at who she is, at her self-esteem, instead of empowering, strengthening her, and allowing her to grow.
We don't want to minimize our spouse. We need to listen to what's going on with them and bear their infirmities. That's what we've already talked about.
But when she tries to stand up for herself, men, a lot of you are blaming her. Look at her. And she maybe isn't doing it well, but she is trying to maintain some sort of normalcy in her mind. Because honestly, when a man treats a woman, it's one thing when a woman is intense and aggressive toward a male. It's a different thing when a male is intense and aggressive toward a female. They're both bad, and the other one deserves a video all on its own too. But here we're talking about this with the men. It has the effect of beating her, like with a whip, beating her to a pulp. And the man doesn't get that that's why she's crying and weeping on the altar. She's been beaten. Her emotions have been minimized. He is not touched with the feeling of her infirmity. Instead, he shames her for her feelings and her infirmities. He finds fault with her weaknesses and insecurities, which now he is magnifying with the way he's treating her, because a woman needs that security in the relationship. But when he whittles away at who she is as an individual and who she is in the relationship, he attacks her insecurity. He met her security. Now she's insecure, and now she can't trust him with anything, because if she says anything, there's going to be an explosion. He's not about to just listen and pray about it. He has to put her in her place. He has to correct her. You're wrong. And it's like, well, maybe she's not wrong. Maybe she has some things that you need to hear too. You may not agree, and you don't have to agree to hear a person.
God made the male and female different, and just because our spouse is different from us doesn't mean that their viewpoint is inferior to ours. 1 Samuel chapter 25, between Nabal, who was the husband, and Abigail, which was the wife. And so there was an incident where King David was out and had the opportunity for he and his men watched some of Nabal's sheep. So Nabal was an evil person, and basically says that he was a churlish man, and which means severe, cruel, hard-hearted, heavy, stubborn, stiff-necked. Basically, he wasn't going to do anything to reward David and his men for taking care of his sheep. And Abigail found out about this. He kind of railed on David, said, who is David and everything. And Abigail found out, well, David and his men were going to come in and basically get what they needed and attack Nabal's household. Abigail found out about it, and she began to get provisions together to take care of them. So she had, the whole idea here by bringing this up is to see that Abigail was empowered to be able to do something that saved the household.
And this is a great example because you see the hard-heartedness, the stubbornness, severe, cruel. He didn't ask Abigail's thoughts or opinions when David's men came, but Abigail made her own decision when she found out, and she gave to David and his men. Now, did God fault her and say, "Ooh, you unsubmissive woman"? She did the right thing, even though her husband did the wrong thing.
Right. So, so we want to talk about now, what to do if you find yourself in a unhealthy relationship where these negative things are taking place. How do you recover?
First of all, you have to realize it's happening. You can't travel anywhere if you don't first know where you are.
True.
And so we would encourage you, please pray over what we've just shared. If we've asked you to watch this video, we're probably seeing some of these things. And if you are dominating and controlling and smothering your spouse, and she's crying out for help, or maybe she's managing it fairly well, and she's just whimpering along, God is seeing it. And there's a responsibility here. And we call on you to line up with, go back over and listen over the first part. What is a godly man? What is that like?
So one of the first things is having a roommate mentality. And many times, in a marriage, we can think, oh, my spouse ought to be interacting with me this way, or I ought to be able to say or do this. But you're not there if you're in an unhealthy relationship. And so you need to go take several steps back and see, just like you would with somebody that's more of a stranger or just not a close acquaintance, you don't take certain liberties there.
If you look at the spectrum of relationship, you need to rebuild. And you're probably on the level of an acquaintance with your spouse. And so if you think, what would I do to get my wife to look at me and want to even spend time and be around me? That's phase one. Just be pleasant, be nice, fix yourself, and, physically and emotionally be attractive and pleasant to be around. That means get off her back. Quit trying to correct her. Quit trying to tell her what to do. Quit pointing the finger. If she says something, just let her say it and be done. You may have to set boundaries. You may have to say, hey, would you watch your tone so we can keep talking? And you may have to say, and if she won't and she's too intense, you may have to say, well, I'm going to have to stop talking because this is getting too intense for me.
And I'm thinking that in the beginning of the relationship and the dating stage, there probably wasn't a lot of, and I want you to change this, and I don't like it that you're doing this going on. There's probably just more of learning each other and adapting to each other and that type of thing. So you're going to have to go back to that, and the relationship isn't supporting your saying that I want you to change. Here's my list.
I don't like it that you're not doing this or that you are doing this.
Right.
And let's say this, she's probably not having sex with you. Or she may not be frequently enough or pleasant when you do. She may not want to. A lot of women don't because they're so severely emotionally injured at this point. Leave her alone. Give her some space to heal and make her want to be with you like that again. It doesn't make sense to a woman to give herself physically to a man when he's not giving himself emotionally to her.
Yeah. If the plant is withered, wilting, feed the plant, water the plant, and then you get some fruit, right? So you don't want to be demanding and take what isn't freely given. So we need to be sowing into planting, depositing, right? And then you can make withdrawals from an account that you've made some deposits in, but you can't make any withdrawals if you're not making any deposits.
And withdrawals aren't good, so you don't want to make them once you become aware. But we accidentally do, don't we?
Yeah.
So unconditional love and acceptance is huge. Accepting your spouse exactly as they are. And they feel loved, they feel accepted, even if they made zero changes. That's what God does for us. That's what we expect. Don't we expect grace from my spouse? Well, but sometimes we're not giving grace. And we're like, can you be merciful if I mess up? Well, I don't know. Can you be merciful? We sow these seeds and then we reap a harvest we don't like. And it's like, well, what seeds did I sow? Did I sow the right seeds and for long enough? And as you turn in this relationship, rebuilding trust takes time.
It does.
So give it some time.
And we want to have more of that live and let live mentality, not where we are demanding from our spouse or else.
Right. And that means that your spouse may make some choices you're not wild about. And we're probably telling her similar things about you, if you're working with us, that is.
Yeah.
If not, if you're just watching this video and you're working on your own, if you can think roommate, you don't control a roommate, and that's how you start to rebuild. It's not meant to be a long-term place to live in. It's meant to position you for healing first, recovery, and then rebuild. We have a lot of videos about connecting.
Just like you are going to go on a road trip, right? And so you first recognize, here's where I am. Here's where I want to be. And there are checkpoints between where I am and where I want to be. And just because you arrive at the first checkpoint, that's not where you want to stay, but it's on your journey to get there.
And we pray that this video has ministered to you and opened and softened your heart towards your wife, because that's what is needed, whether you're the man or the woman, and we are talking to men, to heal a marriage, you have to have a soft heart.
Yeah.
You have to sow godly seeds. Your spouse may sow seeds that are inappropriate, that you don't like, that are negative, but that doesn't mean you give them a harvest back. Your source shouldn't be your spouse, but should be God. So look to Him and sow the fruit of the Spirit into your marriage.